I ran across the profile of somebody that looked absolutely perfect for the role that I was looking for. Unfortunately, this individual's title was president. What president is going to make a move to become a VP? Chuck calls me back and says, "Hey, what's the update on this position?" I said, "Chuck, man, I left you a message." And he said, "Steve, we talked about where I was, 325 plus bonus. This is what I would consider combat pay. They had to pay me a lot more to take that responsibility on. But the reality of it is that's not what I'm looking for." Welcome back for another edition of Recruiter Fuel. This time we have no guests. This is going to be about a conversation between me and you that are watching this. And many of you are going to be recruiters, executive search consultants, and so forth. You know, we like to talk about how good we are in search, and I've been doing this for more than 20 years. But the reality of it is we all make mistakes. So this is going to be one of these sessions where I actually put out my dirty laundry to you to say, these are mistakes that I've made in the last couple of weeks in hopes that you don't make the exact same mistake, because these are common ones. And even after all these years, they still come up. And the first one is what I call, it's all about the title. Now let me explain what I mean by this. Currently leading a search, or just finished up a search for a very senior level individual, VP over a large business, a $500 million business. And I did what every other recruiter would do. I went out on LinkedIn, great tool, and I started doing keyword searches. And I looked for the function, I looked for the title, I looked for the companies, all those things that you and I do. And as I was scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, I ran across the profile of somebody that looked absolutely perfect for the role that I was looking for. Unfortunately, this individual's title was president. The title that I was looking to fill, the role, the responsibility, was a VP, even though it was really a GM of a business. But of course, I looked at it and said, what president is going to make a move to become a VP, even though the business was bigger? So I made the mistake and I went right past that profile. Kind of sat in the back of my mind. I remembered the name. Well, as we're going through the search process, all of a sudden the client sends me a resume that is referred on to them. Guess whose resume that was? The president, the exact profile I had looked at 10 days previously and discounted because the title was not what I thought it should be. Ultimately, I ended up talking to that candidate, and it didn't matter the title to that particular individual. What really mattered was the opportunity. What mattered was the responsibility. What mattered was the size of business. I didn't know any of that because I had skipped by that individual. Now, ultimately, this individual did not get the job, came in number 2 against another candidate. But had the client never referred that resume to me, somebody that I had actually looked at and discounted due to the title, they would have never been in the interview process. And that was our number 2 candidate. So my word of advice is be very careful about making assumptions about titles. I've known this, I've taught this for over 20 years, and I got caught doing the exact same thing. Now, this was at a senior level. I know that recruiters do it at other levels. I've done it at other levels. So we've got to be very careful about assuming that it's all about the title. Now, that was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is kind of along the same vein. And this is what I call, it's all about the compensation. Now, this was a different search, another senior level search. And the search started off where the comp was about $225,000 in base, 30% bonus, some equity. So it's a pretty senior level position. And we ultimately got the client to push up that comp. We started approaching 250. We were kind of pushing the envelope at 260,000. So I get on the phone with the client or with the candidate, right profile, right title, all of those things, the right skill set, and we get into the conversation around compensation. And he says, look, Steve, I'm at $325,000 base. I get 50% bonus plus equity. So I didn't want to turn the guy down right there. I said, look, I think it's going to be a little bit rich on the compensation. Let me have a conversation with the client. I go back to the client, and as soon as I bring it up, of course, they say, look, we've already pushed up the comp. We have our limitations. We cannot go any further. So I did the right thing, and I called what I thought was the right thing. I called the candidate, didn't get him, got his voicemail, and left him a message saying, look, as we were talking, Chuck, unfortunately, your comp is going to be a little bit too high. Well, about 4 days later, Chuck calls me back and says, hey, what's the update on this position? I said, Chuck, man, I left you a message. Here's the date. Here's the time. And it was really around compensation. He said, Steve, we talked about where I was, 325 or where I am, 325 plus bonus. But ultimately, let me tell you what's going on. This is what I would consider combat pay, meaning the situation that I was thrust in, the role that I had, the mess that we had, they had to pay me a lot more to take that responsibility on. But the reality of it is that's not what I'm looking for. What did I do wrong? As soon as I heard 325, 50% bonus, and all these other things, I made the assumption, because this is what often happens, that there's no way this particular individual, senior level executive, is going to make less. I assumed it was all about the money, but it really wasn't about the money. As I drilled in further with the candidate, it was about the balance between life and work. The guy was working 90 to 100 hours a week to get that combat pay. I could have completely missed that candidate because of the compensation discussion. Luckily, he followed up with me and we brought him back into the cycle, and we'll see where this thing actually works out. He's now the #1 candidate in the process of this particular search, and I almost lost him. So it's not all about the money. You've got to understand what's driving that candidate. So that was mistake number 2 in the last couple of weeks. Mistake number 3 is what I would call skill over purpose. We do this, hiring leaders do this, HR does this, we all make the same mistake. And the reality of it is, I know better, but I did it anyways. Let me give you a sense of ultimately what happened here. So I'm doing the intake session for another senior level position. This is a senior director level, about $175,000 plus bonus and so on. And I'm talking to the hiring leader about what she expects in this particular role. And what she continued to do was refer back to the person that was in the role that had recently left to go to another division of the company. And she continued to talk about the skill set of that person as related to the job. Now, the interesting thing is this person, who was basically a director of a small business unit, let's call it that, not quite a GM, but close to it. One of the things that she excelled at was actually using video. So she created these great internal training videos. She communicated with her broad staff using video. So as the hiring leader is actually describing what's required of this job, she's describing the previous candidate. Now, as recruiters, you and I, HR, we want the client to do that. We want our hiring manager, tell me about the best person that was in that job. But here's ultimately the problem. We get caught up in the last person who may have executed on that job in a different way, instead of focusing on the purpose of the position to begin with. This candidate or that individual that was in that role had a unique skill set that ultimately, it was very clear after about a week's worth of searching that nobody else had that skill set. She just chose to do it a different way. But through the intake, I had set the expectation, not the hiring leader, I had set the expectation through my questions in agreement with the hiring leader that I will find somebody that leverages video the exact same way as that particular person who had vacated that position. That person doesn't exist. We had to completely go back to the hiring leader and focus on the purpose of the position. What is it ultimately responsible for delivering, not how to get there? But you know this, we get caught up in this, tell me about the best candidate, which is great, but then we're setting the expectation that we're gonna find exactly the same person. You can get from A to B, in terms of B is the responsibilities of that job, different ways. We're not focusing on the purpose. I did not focus on the purpose. I was actually focusing on the skills, which ultimately could have cost me that search because I was approaching it a very different way. Now look, I've been doing this a long time, as I stated. You've probably been doing this a long time, but we've got to be honest with ourselves. We make some of the rookie mistakes that somebody coming into the business makes even after 20 years. And these are critical errors. especially in this economy where there's less candidates to go around. We have got to be more dead on the money. So, am I proud of the fact that I made mistakes? No. But you and I both know we're all human. We're going to make these mistakes. And the purpose of this Recruiter Fuel is to say, look, I just made this. You don't have to if you keep it to memory. So I hope this was helpful for you. Luckily, these have now worked out so that we're moving forward. We closed the first one. We're moving forward with the other ones. But they're common mistakes I see recruiters make all the time. And I ended up making the exact same mistake. Commit this to memory. Don't make the same mistake I did. I hope this was helpful for you. Your comments would be appreciated below. Have you got into this before? Have you made a similar mistake? What happened? Or to help the entire community that we're talking to through Recruiter Fuel, post the mistakes that you've made at the bottom. We're not perfect. We don't expect each other to be perfect, but this is a great opportunity for you and I to learn from each other. We'll see you in a week.